Welcome to the Prepped and Polished podcast, the podcast that empowers you to take control of your education. Featuring weekly interviews with influencers in the world of education, as well as tutoring tips, lessons, and updates.
Hi everyone, welcome to another Tutoring Tips episode of the Prepped and Polished podcast. It's Anooj of Prepped and Polished. Please be sure to check out our website, www.preppedandpolished.com, for more information. While you're there, sign up for our free tutoring tips and test prep tips newsletter. It comes out monthly. You can join our Prepped and Polished community on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Prepped and Polished. You can submit a question during the show or after to radio@preppedandpolished.com. We love hearing from you. Tip number 1, theorems. Get a Barron's or a Princeton Review prep book and go through the review books and all those boxes with theorems on them. Start jotting them down. Make flashcards, make notes, get a really rough idea of how they work. Next, what you want to do is explain these theorems as if you're explaining the concept brand new to someone else. The goal here is to get a rough idea of how the theorems work and the basic concepts behind them. When you explain these theorems, be as descriptive as possible. For example, theorems like the mean value theorem or the fundamental theorem of calculus or linearization. Explain the functions within the theorem. Explain the significance of the theorem, when you'd be using it. And for theorems like the fundamental theorem of calculus, the bounds or integral theorems, what is A and B? Where would I use the area for this? What is this useful for? Would I solve for different volumes? Would I get at areas? Things like that. What's the significance of it? And you really want to be as descriptive as possible. This will help you understand the theorem better and be able to rehearse it when you're doing problems. And you always want to do problems after practicing these theorems because it's going to really drill them into your head. All right, tip number 2, memorizing. So this is a math exam, so there's not that much memorizing involved. There's a lot of concepts and your ability to solve math problems, but there are a few things that you should memorize just to give you a little bit more speed on the multiple choice especially, and allow you to spend more time on the more difficult problems. Things that I would suggest memorizing are derivatives of different trig functions. The derivative of cosine, tangent, all those weird derivatives that you don't normally see. You just want to have them in your head just in case they ask you, like derivative of tan, secant squared, the derivatives of natural log, the integrals of all these trig functions. Memorize them, and it's going to give you a little bit of an edge and make you a little bit more confident when you're going through the exam. And lastly, tip number 3, past AP exams. On the College Board website, there are past AP exams from every single year almost. Start at the more later years and work your way up to the recent years. And when you do these pre-response questions, what you want to do is solve the problems as completely as possible and start doing those problems that you think are testing concepts that you're not really strong on. For example, if it's finding the volume of like a donut, or using integrals, or if it's limits, do those problems first. And as you're doing them, try to do them as completely as possible. And when you get stuck, start looking at the sample responses. The sample responses are very nice because they're responses that the College Board has deemed excellent responses, a 5, a 4, and they'll have like notes in the grader section that tells you what the student got and what they liked about the response. When you're reading these responses, keep in mind what the student is doing. Why are they explaining different things? They might be solving the problem, but they might be very thorough. They might be explaining what the theorem means or why they chose to do the problem a certain way, why they chose the bounds the way they did. And when you're very detailed like that, it gives a grader more of an idea of how you're approaching the problem, which is ultimately more important than the right answer. So keep that in mind, and by looking at these sample responses after you solve the problem, you'll be able to sort of develop a habit and a sense of what a good answer looks like. This wraps up our show, episode number 109, how to get a 5 on the AP Calculus A, B, and BC exams. Be on the lookout for our next podcast, episode number 110, our next interview guest episode. Remember to access all of our podcast episodes. Go to www.preppedandpolished.com/podcast. Thanks for joining us on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Now go out there and take control of your education.